Welcome back to the Original Medicine Podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about inflammation. Is it the root cause or the response to the problem? More important to consider it a response to the problem. So I want to get into what that looks like. If you have listened to some of these episodes before, and if you haven't, welcome. Happy that you're here. In classical Chinese medicine, we are really concerned with mediumship. Mediumship is really synonymous with resources. There are a lot of different types of resources in the body, similar to how there are different fluids in a car. When you take your car to a mechanic and you say, I've been having this or that problem, a lot of times the symptom that you are describing alerts them to what the problem is under the hood. And this could be a deficient fluid. It could be something else, certainly. But this is a really similar analogy to how I think about using classical Chinese medicine to help people. When they're telling me their symptoms, that often indicates a depletion in some type of mediumship. Again, similar, synonymous with resources, right? Like we can use both words. The symptoms that people have will indicate that there is some sort of depletion of resource. Now, the trick is figuring out what resource is depleted is number one. But then secondly, what is causing that depletion? And that can be multifactorial for sure. As I've talked about in other episodes, sometimes it goes back as far as early life, where your deepest level of energy is formed and is shaped. Maybe there was something that threw that off. And so ever since then, you have not been able to build as much resource. Maybe you have used too much resource through your lifestyle choices. But I also believe that lifestyle choices are often affected by that deepest level of energy. So either way, I'm always looking at, do we need to work at the deepest level, or can we just go in and help your body consolidate the resources that it does have, and then coach you on diet and lifestyle changes that you can make to support your body in healing that process of producing more resources. So when somebody comes in and they have literally any symptom, I'm thinking about what resource is this person missing? And when we have a depleted resource, that is eventually going to turn into a heat situation, because when you are deficient in a resource, you are going to get symptoms of dryness. Now, bear with me for a minute while I describe like a textbook progression of resources, okay? We're in our mid 40s and we're walking up the stairs and we notice our knees are kind of cracking and popping, and maybe they feel a little sore. They're not terrible. And after all, we're in our mid 40s and we're taught that things like this just happen. That is a depletion of Jing. That's our first resource to get a little bit shaky. Then let's say that depletion of blood, and we just put drops in them. You know, we get a prescription, whatever. Maybe our throat is a little dry all the time. This is the next resource. Thin fluids. Then maybe we get an autoimmune diagnosis. Maybe we have more complicated headaches that look more in the realm of migraines. This could be our fourth confluence, which is thick fluids. So we're moving on down the confluences. Okay, so as that gets depleted, we get dryness. Dryness is going to mean that just like if you imagine a river that doesn't have enough water to flow smoothly, water is going to get stuck in little divots and like little pools, like areas on the side, and it can't flow smoothly. And that is what is happening in our bodies prior to having a situation that looks like inflammation. So a lot of people will say, I have a red chest or red neck, I have redness in my face, or maybe my blood pressure is high, or I just feel like I run hot all the time. These might be outward signs of inflammation. Certainly we could have inward signs of inflammation that we would only know if we have some sort of scan, perhaps some blood work done. It might tell us like markers that indicate that we have inflammation in our blood vessels. And I'm going to talk about that next because I think that is really fascinating. For those of you who don't know, my dad was a cardiologist and he was definitely on the low-fat diet train. I probably did not eat an egg yolk until I was in my 30s and in acupuncture school. So I've been through all the things. I've been conditioned in that way of thinking. My dad also incidentally died with heart disease. So I'm not sure that the advice of cardiologists, the mainstream cardiologist, is what we need to be taking under consideration. unless we are considering how wrong it was. And there have always been a small group of cardiologists that believed that cholesterol was not the bad guy. And what do you know? This is proving itself to be true. But interestingly, classical Chinese medicine has known this for thousands of years. Classical Chinese medicine tells us that the plaque buildup that clogs our arteries is a response to heat. So, how do we get heat in our blood? You've heard me talk about how emotions are stored in the blood. Emotions deplete our blood. Our emotional experiences get stored in the blood. Memories get stored in the blood. And also, big emotional experiences consume our blood. So, if you are in a situation in your life where you've had big emotional experiences, perhaps traumas that have not been resolved, maybe you live in a pattern of being really stressed out all the time, this is going to put heat in your blood. Your body is going to be doing the kind thing and responding to that heat as if you were on fire. And the way it responds is, from a classical Chinese medicine perspective, we say that it takes pathological yin and creates something called damp and puts on that heat as a salve. And when your body continues doing that over and over and over, those arteries get clogged. So if we equate that to modern medicine's take on clogged arteries, cholesterol is responding to the heat in the arteries. So cholesterol is doing the right thing, trying to put out the fire, but in continually going through this pattern and process over and over, we get a clogged artery, which is obviously problematic. So I'm not saying that we need to just let this go and do its thing. What I'm saying is we need to back it up a couple of steps and look at, why do we have heat in the blood to begin with? So as I mentioned, unprocessed emotions are going to create heat in many places, but specifically and especially in the blood and in the vessels, but also our diets. When we are drinking coffee every morning, we are draining those fluids. We're draining the resources. We're creating dryness, and then we're creating heat. Alcohol is another big offender. It's raising the yang energy. Yang energy is heat, it is action, and too much of that is drying to our resources. And then when we get dry, we get heat. Spicy food, onions and garlic on a regular basis. Again, this is not occasional. This is every time you cook, you start with onions and garlic. These are incredibly heating, and heat creates dryness. And then dryness lends itself to a situation where you do not have enough resources. And then that looks like a systemic heat situation. And so then your body is going to respond with damp. And in the case where we're talking about arteries here, that's going to look like plaque in the arteries as a result of cholesterol. Is the answer to take a drug that reduces cholesterol production? I don't think it is, because again, we have not addressed the driver of the disease. So when we talk about inflammation is a really significant driver of disease, I would agree with that to some extent, but I think more accurately, inflammation is a response to the driver of the disease, and the driver of disease is heat. The swelling that we get in our joints and people put ice on them, this is just perpetuating the problem. The joints don't have enough resource in them. They're hot, and then they get swollen as the body responds with the pathological yin. It's putting damp on the heat. Just like if you saw a fire in your kitchen, you would put water on it, or you would put like a fire blanket. You would do something to put that heat out. If you have a sunburn on your skin, a lot of times you're putting aloe or some other type of soothing salve because your skin feels like it's on fire. It's very hot, it's uncomfortable, it's tight, it feels dry. The same thing is happening internally when we look at the body from a classical Chinese medicine perspective. When we don't have enough resources, we are going to get heat and we're going to get dryness. And then we're going to have a lot of effects as a result of that heat and dryness that we don't want. Cholesterol is just one example. Like, high levels of cholesterol tell us that it's responding to heat. When we have high blood sugar, this is a sign that we have too much heat in the blood. So is that coming from sugar? It can be, absolutely. Then again, our digestive organs able to handle what we're putting into the body. Maybe the digestive organs are overworked because perhaps we're eating too much sugar or too much processed food, and our bodies just simply cannot deal with that level of like an external thing that is really not meant to be there. And so maybe the answer is just backing off of that, changing the diet can restore the function of the digestive organs. Or maybe the digestive organs were deficient to begin with, and maybe they didn't have the strength that they fully needed. And so anything that you put into your system is resulting in an increase in blood sugar just because your digestive organs are weakened and they can't handle it. We need to address the digestive organs in nearly everyone to some degree. But just to give you an example of how I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking like 2 steps back. Having high cholesterol is not the problem. The problem is what caused us to have high cholesterol. So if we look at that, not being that we need to consume less cholesterol, we need to do things that result in less heat in the body, then the cholesterol doesn't have to have the response that it is. So just to wrap all of that up, what are the things that we need to focus on to reduce inflammation if we already have it, and or to prevent it if we don't have it? First, I think the most important thing is emotional regulation. Emotional skills, learning how to handle the things that come our way, that came our way many years ago. Even the worst things that happen to people that are completely horrific and horrible and should have never happened, those things stay with us, obviously. And learning to accept that in a way that doesn't dismiss the feelings that you have about it, that doesn't dismiss the horror of what happened, perhaps, but it comes to a way of accepting. I think most people would call this radical acceptance, that it happened and you can and will move forward, not being tied up in that because it's so bad for you. To be stuck in that is just creating heat that is then going to affect your systems in so many ways. So it really is in your best interest to get help reframing things that have happened to you, things that are currently going on in your life, things that will potentially happen in the future, so that you can be comfortable while you're uncomfortable and move through that in whatever way feels right for you. For sure, dietary recommendations are incredibly important. Avoiding what our teacher calls the inflamers. These are onions, garlic, spicy food, chocolate, coffee, and alcohol. Certainly anything that is not real food is going to be on that list too. So the food additives that are everywhere these days, trying to avoid that as much as possible. Obviously, pesticides and herbicides that make their way into our foods, and also like the microplastics that show up. Anytime that we have an opportunity to reduce that coming into our body, it's going to do us good. So trying to focus on warm and wet meals that don't include all of the spices all of the time, and then cutting out alcohol and coffee on a regular basis and just enjoying it occasionally. And then chocolate is another one that really stumps people. And people say, but all the studies say chocolate's so good for you. Yes, but chocolate is a bean and it is bitter at its core, at its base, before we add sugar into it. And bitter is going to be a draining energetic, and draining will create dryness eventually. So it's, again, not that you should never eat chocolate, but you should just be considering when you are eating chocolate as a nightly treat after dinner, which is pretty common, that is something that you want to eliminate from your habits. It's not that you can never eat chocolate, it's just that you don't want it to be on a daily basis. And then if you think about sweeter chocolate, you not only have the energetic of draining because it still comes from a bitter bean, but also then you've added sugar to it to make it sweet. Not you, but the manufacturer of the chocolate has sweetened it with sugar. And then sugar is going to raise the yang as well. And then that in itself can be draining, or depleting rather, because it raises the yang, which taxes the yin. So those are the big things to look out for. And really what I encourage people, because I'm really not very puritanical about it, I encourage people to eliminate these from their diet on a daily basis. Enjoy them on the weekends, perhaps. But I think also when you take them out of your diet for a little while and you see what changes and how you feel, when you go back to them, you'll notice. There's this amazing restaurant in town, an Asian restaurant that is just really garlicky. And when I eat there, I really enjoy the food. And the next day, I always have a headache. And it pains me because it is really flavorful, really fresh food, really lovingly prepared, and I enjoy going there, but I always notice the effect that it has on me because at home I don't use garlic at all. It is extremely rare. I would say the times that I use garlic at home are usually if I make my own taco seasoning and put that on a meat that I might be making, some sort of Mexican inspired like bowl, rice, beans, some greens, like some sort of meat. Usually it's chicken when I do that kind of thing, but sometimes also like just a ground beef. I'll make my own taco seasoning, which always includes all those warming herbs. There's like cumin in there, which always feels very warm to me. I usually omit anything like cayenne pepper. And this is like a nice segue too. I'm a big fan of food bloggers and I love to see the recipes that they create, but most of the time they start with onions, garlic, and usually have some sort of spicy chili oil or chili crunch or something, right? So I'm always adjusting for that. And if and when I do choose to use something hot, it is always a much smaller percentage than the recipe calls for. And so I just share that to help you think about how you can still eat the things that you love, but adjust them to better support your health. And then the last thing too is a self-cultivation practice in some way, shape, or form. Whether this is meditation or journaling, looking at our experiences in a way that can shift how we feel about them so that we have better health outcomes. If we are stuck in an emotion for a long time, and many of us are, we can be upset about things that happened 30 years before or even more, even though we've moved on with our life, so to speak. Those kinds of things often benefit from journaling or using a procedure that helps us look at the event or the thing that you're remembering in a different way so that we can shift our consciousness around it, shift our thoughts around it. Because as I've talked about before, like our thoughts come first before the emotion. The thought has to be believed before we can have an emotional response to that thought. So it's very important when we're having an emotion to track what was the thought that led us to that emotion. And at first, you might think, well, yeah, of course. But then if you dig into that thought that you were believing, sometimes you can find that it actually was not exactly true in that way. And so not to dismiss the feeling that you had about it, but to sort of shift the thought process to realize that actually what you were believing wasn't entirely true. And therefore the emotion surrounding that situation changes because the thought has now changed by going through the scenario and looking at alternative explanations for what happened, the outcome, et cetera, et cetera. So on today's episode, thank you so much for joining, where we talked about whether inflammation was the root cause of disease or whether it was a response to a disease process. And Chinese medicine absolutely tells us that inflammation is a response to a disease process, and it is the depletion of our resources. So if we can eat a warm, wet diet most of the time and get a handle on our emotional responses and cultivate our own energy through processes like Tai Chi or Qigong or meditation, we can live a much healthier, robust life without any kind of inflammation. Thank you so much for joining today. If you enjoyed this episode, can you please like it, share it, rate it? It really does help us small little podcasters get our message out to more people. And I think that this medicine is so important for people to learn about because it's so comprehensive and holistic. It really has the power to change so many people's lives. So if you could share, rank it, rate it, like it. I'm on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate it.